This is a sad story about Peter, a famous assassin who used to work for an organization. But, as he got older, that very same organization turned against him, and they put a huge bounty of 7.6 billion on his head. The story starts with a scary rumor that frightens even the toughest armed groups in the world. Imagine a man named Peter, lying among a pile of dead bodies, holding a gun in one hand and smoking a cigarette in the other. What's surprising is that Peter is now an old man in his 60s. He would have died a hero if he had passed away before he got so old. But now, his life is full of tragedy. He's lost everything he owned, and he's being chased by thousands of killers all around the world because of the bounty on his head. Picture a construction site where a man, all covered in blood, is about to be shot by a tall, masked figure. But this man somehow figures out who's behind the mask. He can't believe his eyes and wonders if it's really Peter. With a bloody nose, he stares in disbelief and asks how Peter is still alive when everyone is trying to kill him. How has he managed to stay hidden from everyone? Even if he is the famous Peter, how has he avoided all the attempts on his life? Peter calmly approaches the man and answers that even though hundreds of thousands of people are watching his every move, they'll never find him, no matter how hard they try. Peter removes the mask and informs that the person they're looking for is no longer the same. This shocks the man lying on the ground. Suddenly, a good-looking man with a cigarette in one hand and a gun aimed at him appears. The man hesitates but finally asks, "Are you Peter?" Our story takes us 3 months back in time to a bustling city. In an urban bookstore, we see a pair of weathered hands pinning a paper to the wall. These hands belong to an elderly man with hair as white as snow. He's just received some alarming news. If he keeps ignoring phone calls and avoids going to the hospital, he might not have more than 3 months to live. On his desk, there are scattered bottles and packets of pills, along with his medical report. Despite this grim news, he remains calm. He's faced life-or-death situations throughout his entire existence, dedicating himself to an elusive organization without any regrets. There's only one thing he wishes he had done differently: taking a photograph of himself. He glances at a book titled How to Take a Photo and looks at his reflection in the mirror. Meanwhile, a young girl enters the bookstore in search of middle school textbooks. The old man warmly welcomes her with a friendly remark. He jokes that they sell every book in the store except the ones they don't have. His face lights up with a warm smile, illuminated by the sunlight streaming through the open doors. Holding a stack of books, he proudly informs her that they offer a wide range of textbooks from the past 4 decades and from different countries. Noticing the girl's school uniform and the color of her name tag, he makes an educated guess about her high school question if she is a senior in her high school. She confirms his guess, finding his observations amusing. He claims to know everything about the neighborhood. The girl's attention is then drawn to Peter, who produces a fresh bundle of the books she's looking for. Politely, she declines, citing her meager budget of only 1,001 and the fact that the books are brand new. Undeterred, the old man insists on her taking them, offering a kind and persuasive smile. He begins to unwrap the plastic, still trying to convince her. Even as she continues to decline, he unwraps the bundle, maintaining his friendly demeanor. He points out the affection in her eyes for her younger sibling and encourages her to cherish these books while she still can. Curious, the girl asks him if he's ever had regrets, and his response is brief. He tells her that the longer a person lives, the more regrets they accumulate, with a nostalgic expression crossing his face. Suddenly, memories of being separated from his daughter flood his mind, making him feel powerless when he thinks about it. He acknowledges that there's nothing that can be done about past regrets. He mentions that she might not understand what he means and advises her to return home and take care of her younger siblings. While he's saying all of this, the girl has quietly climbed onto a desk, poised to attack the man from behind with a sharp iron knife. Yet, he remains remarkably composed as he adds that he won't harm her if she obeys his instructions. She is left in stunned silence, caught in the middle of her action. Peter then reveals that he had memorized the faces of every student from the high school, but he just wanted to confirm something. He points out the inconsistencies in her story. The high school was only established 2 years ago, and she couldn't have been a senior there. Peter adds that the faint scent of the iron knife, which she had tried to mask with a feeble perfume, was the final giveaway. He tells her that she couldn't hide the smell of blood from someone who had been around blood their whole life. Realizing that her disguise had been exposed, she decided to attack the man. Her arm was raised, clutching the knife as she charged at him. However, the moment her eyes locked onto his menacing gaze and noticed his pupils contracting, signaling imminent danger, she understood that, despite having the knife, she was the one in danger. In haste, she retreated into the dimly lit bookstore. Once Peter had finished bundling the books, he moved behind the desk and instructed her to take them to her sibling. Even though he knew she had been sent to kill him, with his 50 years of experience, he could sense that she was sincere about her sibling by the look in her eyes. Peter then surprises her by revealing that he comes from the same orphanage as she does. He was familiar with their old script. This revelation amuses her, and in her unintentional amusement, she accidentally uses an honorific for him. Aware that the organization would likely employ another strategy after the first one failed, Peter sprang into action. He swiftly pinned the girl to the ground in a chokehold. The girl couldn't quite grasp what he meant by Plan B, when suddenly 2 men descended from above, armed with guns. Peter, attempting to evade their gunfire, used his own body to shield the girl from harm. He explained that when a volunteer fails a mission, they're either killed or incapacitated. The girl's gaze shifted to Peter's abdomen, where a bullet had struck him, causing his blood to pool on the floor. Taking cover behind the bookshelves, Peter retrieved a firearm. However, before he could react, the girl found herself at the mercy of the 2 men, one of them wearing a black hoodie, pointing a gun at her. Without hesitation, the taller man, whose hair was tied in a bun, unleashed a powerful punch to Peter's face, causing his bones to crack and rendering him unable to move, writhing in pain on the floor. As the legendary Peter struggled to protect himself, the man with the black hoodie seemed to derive amusement from seeing such an iconic figure brought to a state of helplessness. A man known as the 8-legged man steps onto the stage. He's the boss's informant, recognizable by his long black overcoat and a distinctive octopus tattoo on his bald head. He addresses Peter, using the term Sunbeam, which carries a mix of praise and mockery. He reminds Peter of his past as a man with objectives that outranked everyone else, a person with an extraordinary reputation for being unpredictable. Peter, annoyed by the unnecessary taunting, urges the informant to get to the point and explain why the boss wants him dead. The informant, wearing an expressionless face, responds that the boss simply dislikes Peter and warns that if he steps out of his current world, he'll be a target for people trying to end his life. The scene shifts to a visual of numerous hands gripping guns, all aimed at one man, making the gravity of the situation clear. The informant then discloses the staggering bounty placed on Peter's head, 7.6 billion won. Still on the ground and with a resentful look at the informant, Peter reluctantly reveals that the bounty matches the amount of money in his bank account. The informant, maintaining a blank expression, acknowledges his statement, emphasizing that it's the money he risked his life to collect, now under someone else's control. Wearing a monstrous, sickening expression, the bald man issues a chilling demand to our terrified protagonist, insisting that he should meet his end at his hands. With brutal force, he delivers a powerful punch to Peter's face, causing blood to gush from his mouth. Shortly after, the man responsible for disfiguring Peter's face joins in the assault. He rains down a relentless barrage of deadly punches, summons every ounce of his strength, and hurls Peter across the storeroom. The force is so great that it stirs up a gust of wind, lifting the curtains and sending Peter crashing to the ground once more. As they observe Peter, who can't lift a finger and is being bombarded with attacks, the men assume he's about to lose consciousness. Disappointed at how easily they've handled the situation, they decide it's time to cover their tracks and clean up the aftermath. Next, Peter had one last surprise up his sleeve. He hurled a flashbang at the eight-legged man, catching him completely off guard. A deafening explosion echoed through the store, and a blinding light spilled out onto the streets. The hitmen cursed their luck for losing track of Peter after all the effort they put into catching him. It dawned on them that he had intentionally lured them toward the back door. Though Peter was heavily wounded and bleeding, he still clung to hope. The eight-legged man instructed his subordinate to pursue Peter, believing he couldn't have gotten too far in his weakened state. In the background, the volunteer girl lay on the ground, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion as she watched the chaotic events unfold. The story then transitions to a scene at a children's playground, where the ground, worn from years of use, was now drenched in rain. We find our protagonist, breathless and desperate for break, seeking shelter under a playground slides. Blood continues to drip from the wound on his lower abdomen. As he struggles with his situation, he can't help but reflect on the passage of time and the toll it has taken on him. He contemplates his own aging and the inability to fight back as he once did. His thoughts transport him back to the days when he served the mysterious organization. During that time, his life was inseparably linked to the organization itself. In his recollections, we see him among a group of around 13 orphans, seated around a large table, diligently learning how to assemble weapons. They were supervised by a few adults associated with the organization. He mentions the harsh reality of his upbringing, where he bled day in and day out, not from learning to hold a pencil, but from mastering the art of handling a knife and carrying out brutal acts of violence on behalf of the organization. While his peers were navigating the world of social media, he was learning the covert skills of wiretapping and eavesdropping to the point of exhaustion. While others his age were experiencing the joys of love and dating, he was living the life of a Russian spy, enduring daily frostbite and harsh conditions. As people around him started families and embraced a semblance of normalcy, he found himself in a constant battle for survival, operating alongside a terrorist group. Despite having dedicated his life and sacrificed everything for the organization, a dark period dawned when a new boss assumed control. Seated on a grand chair, legs crossed with an air of authority, this new leader deemed him replaceable. The boss cited Peter's aging and deteriorating health as reasons for his dismissal, despite his astronomical reputation. It was a painful moment for Peter, who had risked his life and given his all for the organization, only to be cast aside like damaged goods. Now, on the rain-soaked playground, racked with pain, Peter couldn't help but wonder, had his life always been this miserable? He had never craved wealth or honor, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his existence had been a harsh cycle of hardship and suffering. A wave of excruciating pain surged through Peter's body, and he pulled with all his might to lift himself from the ground. Through clenched teeth, he resolved not to submit and let those assaulters claim the money he had saved for his daughter, the only family he had left. In his dire condition, covered in a pool of his own dark, viscous blood, Peter remained motionless under the relentless rainstorm throughout the night. The story then shifts to the hideout of the eight-legged man, which happens to be a lavish Chinese hotel. The individuals who had stormed Peter's bookstore with the intent to kill him are now engaged in a discussion about their recent encounter and the substantial bounty promised to them. The man in the black hoodie appears frustrated that they came so close to eliminating Peter, but ultimately lost him. The man in the green jacket concurs, but questions the logic of placing such a hefty reward on someone who was already near death. The man in the black hoodie reminds his companion that it's a way of showing respect to a legendary figure of Peter's caliber, to which the other guy responds, emphasizing the importance of money. As the man in the hoodie lifts a pot filled with spaghetti, Their conversation reveals that he had given up his kickboxing championship title for a shot at winning the 7.6 billion won bounty. One of the men holds a photograph of Peter, boldly declaring his intent to kill the elderly man himself and succeed in his mission. However, their conversation is interrupted by a sudden and youthful voice booming from the kitchen behind them. The voice claims that the photograph they're holding is the first picture ever taken with Peter in it. The young man is dressed similarly to Peter, leading them to suspect that he might be the target. He examines his own body, noting the rugged physique, bulging veins, black hair, and the wound still seeping blood through his blood-stained clothes. He confesses that he doesn't know how this transformation occurred. It happened when he was completely unaware. The man in the green jacket tries to dismiss the suspicion, making light of the situation by suggesting that a student like the young man doesn't belong there. However, the young man abruptly interrupts him, claiming to know everything, including why he's there, and demanding to see the eight-legged man immediately. Both men regard each other with a hidden agenda. The man in the green jacket mumbles that, being from the same line of work, he can't allow the young man to live. He contemplates finishing him off right then and there. He grabs the young man's shoulder and raises his fist to strike. But before he can land the blow, the young man effortlessly catches his fist. Astonished by the unnatural strength, the man can only stare at his own hands in disbelief. Peter realizes that this is the same man who had deformed his own face with a punch. With a determined resolve, Peter mimics the action, crumpling the man's captured fist in his grasp. The guy who had his hand deformed by Peter winces in pain, his gaze filled with horror as he examines his hand. Seizing the opportunity, the man in the black hoodie plans to strike Peter with a knife, aiming to plunge it into his back. However, Peter swiftly delivers 5 blows in midair, causing the man to lose his grip on the knife. The injured man regains his footing, adopting a threatening posture as he displays his knife. He demands to know who sent Peter here. Ignoring the question, Peter calmly begins to explain his perspective. He mentions that those who have mastered the use of cutlery are considered third class. Peter proceeds to demonstrate his point by grabbing octopus legs from the counter and wrapping them around his fists. He adds that individuals who have mastered all types of weapons are classified as second class, while those in the first class can wield anything and everything as a weapon. Still in a state of shock, the man in the green jacket charges toward Peter with his knife poised for an attack. In a swift motion, Peter swings the octopus legs, disarming the man, and then loops the legs around his neck. With a powerful throw, Peter hurls him through the kitchen, resulting in a chaotic mess in the room. With an extraordinary burst of strength, Peter slams his head into the pot filled with freshly prepared spaghetti. The impact is so intense that it distorts the metal pot itself, causing its contents to splatter wildly around the kitchen. Defeated and sprawled on the ground, the man in the green jacket manages to weakly inquire about Peter's identity. However, before he can pose his next question, he succumbs to unconsciousness. As Peter reflects on a recent threat from the eight-legged man, he turns his attention to the photograph held by the other men, an image of his former self. He asks if it's the only picture they possess of him. Peter, a man that was once called the best in the field, had become the younger version of him when he opened his eyes. He calmly lights a cigarette and uses the lit end to set fire to the photograph. With deliberate finality, Peter proclaims that even if thousands were to die and be reborn 1,000 times, they would never succeed in finding him. The Peter they once knew is now dead. In this moment, we witness a full view of the protagonist after his astonishing transformation. His eyes burn a fiery red as he gazes at his former life, the photograph, as it smolders away in his hands. The story continues in an urban setting, with a car racing along slippery roads as dusk sets in. A voice inside the car vents frustration at how they had Peter within their grasp but couldn't eliminate him. Inside the vehicle, two individuals are seated: the eight-legged man and the young woman who was sent as a volunteer to assassinate Peter. The eight-legged man reveals his intention to capture Peter before his wanted status becomes official. He discloses that Peter is battling cancer and is on the verge of death. The eight-legged man wishes that Peter would show some kindness to his younger colleagues and simply surrender. He turns to the volunteer girl, her face bearing bruises and an eye patch, lost in her thoughts and appearing somewhat worried. Their destination is the eight-legged man's opulent hideout, marked by a grand sign that reads "Flower Garden." Peter forcefully swings open the hotel door, revealing an empty interior. He gazes around the room with unwavering determination and remarks that the eight-legged man's life has been prolonged. Meanwhile, in a crowded public transport scene, people brush past each other, some of them taken aback by Peter's transformed physique. Peter himself is astonished by this miraculous change. He carefully examines his face and body, standing shirtless before a mirror. He's amazed to find that the bullet wound on his lower abdomen has vanished, and the unbearable cancer pain has mysteriously departed from his body. In awe of his rebirth, Peter comes to a startling realization. He has genuinely returned to his younger self. Overwhelmed by this revelation, he feels both confused and grateful, realizing that in his current state, no one can recognize him as the old Peter. Peter quickly realizes that his old clothes no longer fit his renewed life. As he walks, he overhears a group of rather eccentric individuals in the public restroom. These individuals are covered in designer clothes and tattoos, and they engage in a comical conversation. Amidst their chatter, they discuss a girl's paycheck and her mother's health condition, all while casually smoking in a designated no-smoking area. Passers-by are visibly bothered by the smoke, but the group of individuals appears unconcerned about the inconvenience they're causing. Peter politely approaches them and kindly asks them to step outside if they wish to smoke, taking a stand against their disregard for the no-smoking rule. The group of thugs becomes visibly disturbed by Peter's request and attempts to intimidate him. However, Peter remains unfazed and calmly points out that they are the only ones smoking in the area. One of the thugs, attempting to assert dominance, threatens Peter for not using honorifics when addressing his elders. The situation escalates when the other thug slaps Peter across the face, warning him that he's getting off easy today due to his good mood, but hinting at dire consequences if they encounter Peter misbehaving elsewhere. The thugs continue to act arrogantly, further irritating Peter. Realizing that these individuals need a lesson in respect, he decides not to waste any more time. Peter swiftly locks the nearest door, cutting off their escape route. Turning his attention back to the thugs, Peter rolls up his sleeves and stretches his arms, preparing to engage in a physical confrontation. He's determined to teach them a lesson about respecting their elders, even though his youthful appearance might still deceive them into underestimating him. The thug in the silver suit, clearly irritated, seems ready to put an end to the confrontation. He raises his hand with the intention to strike Peter, but Peter swiftly jabs him under the ribs, causing him to grunt in pain and collapse to the ground. The other thug, not willing to back down, pulls out a pocket knife and threatens Peter with it. He demands to know if Peter recognizes him. Peter, still facing away from him, calmly replies that he doesn't recognize the thug. However, he does notice that the thug is holding the pocket knife incorrectly, which could lead to self-inflicted harm if he attempts to use it. Taken aback, the thug argues that he had no intention of harming himself. But Peter, his eyes now gleaming with a dangerous intensity, assumes a stance that suggests a person preparing to attack. He points out that someone planning to stab another person shouldn't have their arms in front of them. Despite Peter's warning, the enraged thug charges forward, one arm still extended, and screams at Peter to stop talking. Ignoring the thug's threat, Peter skillfully sidesteps the attack, swiftly disarming the thug and tossing the pocket knife aside. In a blur of movement, Peter delivers a series of punishing blows to the thug's neck, causing him intense pain. Gasping for breath and writhing in agony, the thug realizes the severity of the situation. Peter examines the discarded pocket knife and remarks that if the thug had used it to stab him, he would have suffered threefold consequences. The thug, now terrified by Peter's strength, starts to back away, his voice trembling as he demands to know who Peter is. Peter leans in close, his tone sinister, and whispers into the thug's ear while squeezing his shoulder, eliciting a painful grunt. He ominously informs the thug that his youthful appearance will not spare him, and he must meet his end right there. Peter then surprises the thug by stating his intention to take their clothes. The thug looks baffled, but Peter remains resolute, declaring his decision to live a lawful life from now on. We see Peter in his newly acquired outfit, checking his phone as he watches the defeated thugs from earlier walking away in the distance. The larger thug is wearing what appears to be Peter's old red flannel shirt and is being assisted by the other thug. However, Peter's mood takes a downturn when he realizes that his substantial 7.6 billion won has vanished from his bank account, despite his earlier warning to the thug not to touch the money. Overhearing a conversation between a couple of students about a scholarship offered by the Glory Foundation, Peter's memories are revived. He recalls growing up at the Glory Orphanage, a small-scale facility run by a religious organization with a modest infrastructure, as depicted in the panel. Over the past 50 years, this small orphanage has evolved into a powerful cartel known as the Glory Club, extending its influence into both politics and business. The organization now operates under the name Glory Club throughout the area, projecting an image of a charitable organization dedicated to helping orphans, a disguise that Peter had once been part of. However, there's a determined look in Peter's eyes now, signaling his resolve to bring down the organization by his own hand. The scene shifts to a dimly lit warehouse. Inside, we see an ominous figure seated on a chair, lost in deep thought. The surroundings are strewn with lifeless pig carcasses and a few empty buckets scattered on the floor. The man, unfazed, questions the eight-legged man who looms over him, asking if he's the only one they've sent to capture him. The eight-legged man, in a mocking tone, responds that he's more than sufficient for someone of his caliber. The seated man, with a sly grin, remarks that the Glory Club has become too satisfied. The eight-legged man brushes off the comment, eager to swiftly resolve the situation with as little pain as possible. The man chuckles with an air of smugness, casually resting his hand on his chin as he reveals a surprise. As he speaks, 4 imposing men emerge from the shadows around the eight-legged man. These individuals belong to the renowned Wagner Mercenary, a top-tier private military company from the West that has been active since 1984. They look intimidating, radiating both physical stature and strength. However, despite the formidable appearance of the mercenaries, the eight-legged man remains unfazed, his hand still casually tucked in his pocket. This unexpected calmness wipes the smug grin off the other man's face. He begins to suspect that this isn't one of the 12 apostles of the Glory Club. This person appears strangely confident. In a stern tone, the man orders his military men to treat the guest well. Following this command, each of the mercenaries launches a series of powerful attacks aimed at the eight-legged man, who maintains his composure throughout the assault. Suddenly, the scene shifts to the man who had just issued orders. His expression changes from one of authority to one of sheer terror. He stares in disbelief at the blood-splattered ground and the unharmed eight-legged man. The eight-legged man employs his unique technique, known as full-body hypermobility, to swiftly eliminate the men. His face bears an eerie smile, his eyes devoid of emotion, as he gazes directly at the man. It is revealed that he holds a rank of B+ within the organization and was once the national rank 1 in jiu-jitsu. Terrified by the horrifying display before him, the man recoils, screaming for the eight-legged man to stay away as he approaches, still twisted in the same unnatural manner. Meanwhile, at the flower garden, the girl and the eight-legged man are seen examining the aftermath of the brutal encounter. No cameras or weapons were found as evidence to reveal what had actually transpired. This left the eight-legged man to believe that Peter was responsible. He was baffled by how Peter managed to survive when multiple men had been sent to kill him, only for those men to end up dead at his hands instead. Approaching a large framed dragon artwork on the wall, the eight-legged man hatches a plan to claim the bounty on Peter's head before it expires. He instructs the girl to keep him informed of any information about Peter's whereabouts as soon as she obtains it. The girl complies with his request, her thoughts drifting back to the events at the bookstore and how Peter had saved her life. The hotel door unexpectedly swings open, surprising the eight-legged man, the girl, and the hotel's waiter, as it's not a regular working day. A young man in a suit, with brown hair streaked with white, casually strolls in and takes a seat at one of the tables. He picks up his chopsticks, ready to enjoy the dumplings in front of him. The waiter asks if the young man has a reservation, but he denies having one, admitting that he does have a score to settle. The eight-legged man responds with a question about whether the young man had pressed him for tabs. The young man agrees and explains that the tab was quite substantial, totaling around 7.6 billion won. His brows furrow as he glares at the eight-legged man with a vengeful look in his eyes. The eight-legged man maintains a polite smile, not initially attaching much importance to the young man's claim. However, he soon becomes struck by the familiarity of the mentioned bounty. His face drains of all color, and he urgently instructs them to lock the doors. Sensing that this man must have some connection to Peter, he warns him that, regardless of the truth behind his association with Peter, he won't be leaving the building alive. Still puzzled about how this stranger obtained information about Peter's bounty, especially since he's not affiliated with the organization, he tries to formulate a plausible explanation. Could he be Peter's secret child? Or perhaps a disciple? But Peter always woke up alone. It didn't make sense. Meanwhile, the waiter swiftly assembles and loads a gun, and both the eight-legged man and the young man lock eyes. The eight-legged man presents him with two options. One, he can choose to return alive by revealing Peter's whereabouts. Or two, he can resist and face certain death. With an air of indifference, the man responds that he doesn't require either of the options presented by the eight-legged man. Instead, he proposes a third choice, to hear a story that nobody has survived listening after. In a shocking revelation, he discloses his true identity to the eight-legged man. He is Peter, the very person the eight-legged man and his men had been relentlessly pursuing in order to claim the bounty on his head. The eight-legged man struggles to process this revelation, his face frozen in disbelief. He attempts to piece together the puzzle. The eight-legged man pondered the situation. If this man's claim was true, and Peter wasn't the killer, then why had this man attacked them? Meanwhile, Peter continued to savor the dumplings. With a stern tone, the eight-legged man addressed Peter, still assuming he was just a student. He pointed out that the waiter was armed with a real gun and demanded that Peter honestly reveal his connection to Peter. In the background, the girl discreetly drew a shiny knife from behind her back, preparing for a potential confrontation. As Peter picked up a piece of teriyaki octopus balls with his chopsticks, he responded calmly. He told the eight-legged man that if he truly wanted to know the answer, he'd have to kill him. The eight-legged man, seemingly delighted by this invitation to a showdown, stated that killing was his specialty. With the young man willingly accepting his fate, the eight-legged man instructed the waiter to ease up on him. In an instant, as the waiter swiftly cocked his gun and fired a bullet at Peter, a chopstick sliced through the air, piercing his blood vessel and rendering him unconscious. The girl turned her head to witness the waiter knocked out cold, wondering how a man who appeared to be the same age as her could hit such a vital spot with just a chopstick, a feat that no one in the Glory organization had ever achieved. Peter calmly returned to enjoying his meal, seemingly unfazed by the extraordinary display of his skills. The eight-legged man, on the other hand, was impressed by this flashy demonstration of expertise. He stepped over the incapacitated waiter and began asking Peter about the club he was affiliated with, expressing surprise that he hadn't known about someone with Peter's abilities and even inviting him to join his own club. However, the eight-legged man suddenly erupted in anger, unleashing a furious barrage of bullets at Peter. Reacting quickly, Peter lifted the table and took cover behind it. The eight-legged man sinisterly pointed out that this wasn't a movie where a table could block bullets, and a red liquid began seeping from behind the makeshift barricade. With a dark chuckle, the eight-legged man remarked that it would be a shame if the young man died there and then, offering him another chance to reveal information about Peter. His attention was drawn to the spilled oil containers, suggesting that the red puddle was actually chili oil. As he anxiously scanned the area, losing sight of the young man who seemed to vanish like a ghost, the eight-legged man hurriedly searched for him behind a nearby pillar, glancing left and right. Suddenly, he felt a presence above him and looked up to see Peter clinging to the metal framework attached to the ceiling of the room, using it to stay off the ground. Peter appeared to have something in his mouth, and with a swift motion, he spat the chili oil directly onto the eight-legged man's face, temporarily blinding him. Taking advantage of the distraction, Peter descended to the ground and struck the eight-legged man's arm. Peter delivered a powerful blow under the eight-legged man's chin, lifting him off the ground and causing blood to trickle from his mouth. The eight-legged man couldn't grasp how a young kid like Peter possessed such incredible strength and skills at his age. The chili oil covering his face had made it difficult for him to open his eyes, but when he finally managed to do so, he saw Peter hurtling towards him, his arms outstretched and his eyes filled with a deadly determination. In a swift and unexpected move, Peter twisted the eight-legged man's head, catching him completely off guard. The sound of choking filled the air as the eight-legged man's lifeless body fell to the ground with a heavy thud. Standing tall over the defeated figure, Peter starts to move away from the men. Eight-legged men who had overcame over nearly all his opponents with his prized special technique. It was his first time seeing someone so skilled at the young men age. A flashback revealed a scene where children were being trained in martial arts, taught to exploit their enemies' distractions and vulnerabilities. Among these orphans, in the front row, was a young boy who bore a striking resemblance to the eight-legged man, listening attentively to the teachings. The young kid seemed to be practicing a special technique, one that involved twisting an opponent's body to disable them completely. The trainer instructed him to make it tight enough to potentially kill someone. He remembered the trainer's warning not to become too overconfident and turn his back, assuming victory prematurely. After years of dedicated training, he believed he had mastered the technique and felt confident that he couldn't be defeated by anyone. However, the eight-legged man snapped back to reality. His eyes filled with a terrifying determination as he seized Peter's ankles and began coiling his limbs around Peter's with a tornado-like motion. The force caused the bones in Peter's elbows, ribs, and thighs to crack and twist. Peter screamed in excruciating pain, his body drenched in sweat, while the eight-legged man wore a sinister grin. He gloated about having far more experience than newcomers like Peter and cursed him loudly, wishing for his death. Then, a chilling voice echoed from above, and it dawned on the eight-legged man that the body he had mercilessly twisted and broken, believing it to be Peter, was actually one of his own subordinates. The effects of the chili oil still impaired his vision.
What lies ahead for them as they venture into this mystical world? What do you think will happen next? Don't forget to hit the like button, comment if you want to continue this series, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.